Today, I will be talking about the Hong Kong independence protests. This topic is not only important because it's with regards to the basic freedoms of 7 million people, but it's also a much broader check on the global aspirations of the Chinese Communist Party's imperialistic ideals and civil liberties violations. Let's jump right in with this timeline right here. I know it's big, but this is a complicated matter. Stay with me. So, in order to get started, we need to jump a couple hundred years back in time. If you paid attention in AP World, you may remember that Hong Kong was seceded to Britain through the Nanjing Treaty after the Qing dynasty lost the First Opium War on August 29, 1842. Then, on October 18, 1860, the Qing dynasty lost the Second Opium War. One of the results is the now British colonies, including Hong Kong, are leased to the British for 99 years from 1898. Now jumping forward, on July 1st, 1997, Hong Kong was handed back over to the People's Republic of China, on the condition that they protect Hong Kong's independent courts, autonomy from China, and the freedom of speech and expression for at least 50 years, ending in 2047, with the eventual assimilation of Hong Kong into the rest of China. On July 1st, 2003, protests erupted in Hong Kong as civilians pushed back against the legislature that would have punished citizens for speaking against the Chinese government, even though the freedom of speech is guaranteed under the Hong Kong Constitution. Fast forward 10 years or so to September 26, 2014. Hong Kong citizens protest regarding China's influence in Hong Kong's electoral systems. These are what became known as the umbrella protests. Okay, now this whole debacle really gets kicked off due to a murder. On February 17, 2018, Chan Tong-kai admitted to Hong Kong authorities that he murdered his girlfriend, Poon Hyo-wing, I probably butchered those names, while on vacation with her in Taiwan. Now, since Chan Tong-kai was already back in Hong Kong, he couldn't be charged for murder in Taiwan because Taiwan had no jurisdiction over Hong Kong, and Chan Tong-kai couldn't be extradited to Taiwan because Hong Kong and Taiwan had no extradition agreement. Then, on February of 2019, an extradition bill is introduced in the Hong Kong government, which would allow the transfer of criminals out of Hong Kong to Taiwan, but it also included extradition to mainland China. On March 31st of the same year, tens of thousands of people took to the streets to protest the extradition bill because they were concerned about their autonomy from China. About 1 month later, Carrie Lam, Hong Kong's chief executive, proposed amendments to the bill, which essentially allowed anyone that the Chinese government didn't like to be shipped to mainland China for trial, where they would just mysteriously disappear into China's legal system. Then, on June 9th, an estimated 1 million people protest to have the extradition bill taken back. Chief Executive Carrie Lam refused to scrap the bill. 3 days later, protests turned violent, and police responded with tear gas and other deterrents. 2 days later, Carrie Lam announces that the extradition bill will be delayed. And then another 2 days later, an estimated 2 million people protest to have the entire bill scrapped. Bear in mind, 2 million people is about 1/4 of Hong Kong's entire population. And then another 2 days later, Carrie Lam announces that the bill will be shelved, but she didn't say it would be officially withdrawn. In July, the legislative building of Hong Kong was occupied by protesters. Violence between protesters and police had been growing increasingly since that point. On August 12th, protesters occupied the Hong Kong International Airport to protest police brutality. These protests grew extremely violent, with people beaten and even killed. Finally, on September 4th, 2019, Carrie Lam officially announced the formal withdrawal of the extradition bill. But we're not done yet. On July 1st, 2020, a Hong Kong national security law came into effect straight out of Beijing, which absolutely stripped Hong Kong of its autonomy and freedom of speech. After the resignation of multiple pro-democracy members of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong, the government of the United Kingdom declared that the People's Republic of China was not upholding the terms they agreed to. Here are the sources for my timeline. Okay, let's get into some context here. Hong Kong consists of a peninsula on the south end of mainland China, and islands located just off the coast of mainland China, and an area of 688 square miles, or 6 times the size of Washington, D.C. Its climate is subtropical monsoon, which is cool and humid in the winter, hot and rainy during spring through summer, and warm and sunny in the fall. Hong Kong is hilly and mountainous, and contains steep slopes, with lowlands in the north. Hong Kong is a notable economic powerhouse, which is a major reason China is trying to dig their claws into the city. The city is the world's 10th largest exporter and 9th largest importer. They have a free market-based economy, another stark divide with communist China, and a shocking 100% of the total population lives in an urban environment. Their largest trade partner is, in fact, China, considering their distance from each other. Hong Kong does have a bit of an issue with rising housing prices and income inequality. Hong Kong's economy is largely dependent on service-based industries, such as trading and logistics, financial, and professional. That's like your doctors and stuff. 100% of Hong Kong's electricity comes from fossil fuels, which I thought was an interesting statistic. As of July of 2020, an estimated 7.2 million people live in Hong Kong. As of 2016, 92% of the population is estimated to be Chinese, with Filipinos making up 2.5%, Indonesian making up 2.1%, and other groups making up 3.4%. Hong Kong has 3 official languages: Cantonese, English, and Mandarin. Cantonese is the main language, with 88% of the population speaking it. The most major religion practiced in Hong Kong is Buddhism or Taoism, with 27.9% of the population practicing. An important note is that many citizens of Hong Kong practice Confucianism, regardless of their religious affiliation. Hong Kong has the 8th highest life expectancy in the world at 83.2 years. Hong Kong's technical name is the Hong Kong Administrative Region, and it is a special administrative region of the People's Republic of China. Technically speaking, Hong Kong is a part of China, but the citizens of Hong Kong are granted some autonomy and certain freedoms, like the freedom of speech and expression, which the authoritarian Chinese government does not like very much. Hong Kong has a presidential limited democracy, with Carrie Lam acting as Hong Kong's chief executive. There is also a Senate, so to speak, called the Legislative Council of Hong Kong. More on that later. A document called the Basic Law of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China is what acts as Hong Kong's constitution. What a mouthful. The protest within the Legislative Council of Hong Kong can be loosely tied in with the recent riots seen at the US Capitol building. I'd like to emphasize the word loosely, big asterisk there. I say loosely because the Hong Kong protesters stormed the Hong Kong Legislative Building for completely different reasons than the wackos at the United States Capitol. My point is that the Hong Kong Legislative Building carries out the same job that the Capitol of the United States serves, and both buildings were stormed by people who felt they were being mistreated, for lack of a better word. Alright, so what exactly is happening in Hong Kong? Well, hopefully my timeline provided a little bit of an outline to the situation. Basically, Hong Kong really wants to stay independent from Chinese authoritarian rule. And China, of course, wants to crack down on Hong Kong's autonomy because of how economically crucial the city is. Hong Kong's autonomy was protected under the One Country, Two System agreement, but this has been increasingly encroached upon by Chinese authoritarian rule in recent years. The Hong Kong extradition bill seems fine at face value. After all, it would have allowed the Taiwanese government to charge and punish Chan Tong-kai for the murder of his girlfriend. However, the deal breaker was the fact that the bill also allowed extradition to mainland China, which meant that any citizen of Hong Kong that the Chinese government didn't like could be yoinked out of Hong Kong and sent to China to await trial. Which, if we know anything about China's practices, people who speak out against Chinese authoritarian rule don't stay around for long. Dozens of protests have occurred, starting off peaceful but growing increasingly violent ever since. Police have used tactics such as tear gas, rubber bullets, and even water cannons that shoot dye, so protesters hit by it could be identified and arrested if found later. It's worth noting that much of Hong Kong's police force sympathizes with China. Many major protests have taken place, such as the storming of the Legislative Council building of Hong Kong, as mentioned earlier, and the protest at the National Airport of Hong Kong, both of which turned into violent clashes with police. Most recently, China passed a bill called the Hong Kong National Security Law, which heavily cracked down on the autonomy of Hong Kong and the freedoms guaranteed to its citizens. At this point, the government of the United Kingdom declared that China was not upholding the terms they originally agreed to. So why are the citizens of Hong Kong still protesting? After all, the extradition bill was withdrawn. Well, there are 5 key demands outlined by Hong Kong protesters. 1 is the withdrawal of the extradition bill, which has in fact been achieved. 2 is a commission of inquiry to investigate police brutality. 3 is a retraction from calling the Hong Kong protesters rioters from the Chinese government. 4 is amnesty for arrested protesters, and 5 is dual universal suffrage, meaning for both the Legislative Council and the Chief Executive. That last one may seem a little confusing. Essentially, half of Hong Kong's Senate is elected by actual citizens, while the other half is elected by corporate interest groups. Since large corporations want to secure business with China, they often lead towards pro-China policy. So essentially, about half of Hong Kong's Legislative Council leans towards China-favored policy, even though a large portion of Hong Kong's population favors pro-democracy representatives and policies. I'm going to dedicate this slide to videos demonstrating the atrocities of Hong Kong police and authoritarian rule of the Chinese government. Video links will be posted in the description of this video, but I believe the school blocks video descriptions on your Chromebook, so maybe pull this video up on your phone to view the videos. Some of these are slightly graphic, so do beware. I don't link these videos because I want to, I link them because they are necessary to understanding why the citizens of Hong Kong are so outraged. So what do I predict will happen to Hong Kong? I predict under a Biden administration, a soft approach, if any, will be taken against the People's Republic of China to combat their predations of Hong Kong. Whether this is the right approach or not, I'm simply not sure of. A hard approach will most likely result in China partially cutting trade with the US, stifling our economy. A soft approach may not even effectuate any sort of change in policy from the People's Republic of China, leaving millions of Hong Kong citizens under the thumb of Chinese authoritarian rule. If I were to make the call, I would in fact take a hardline approach against the Chinese government. This sort of treatment cannot be allowed to continue. The difference between the Tiananmen Square massacre and the Hong Kong protests is the fact that the entire world is watching the Hong Kong protests happen. We need to do something for the citizens of Hong Kong and to keep China's regional ambitions and authoritarian rule in check. Thank you for watching.